I have this really interesting reoccurring dream. I don't know if I'd call it a nightmare, but it's pretty disturbing. And it goes something like this. I find myself in the middle of a stage, and there's kind of a dense but sheer curtain in front of me. And I look out there, and I see hundreds or thousands of people, and I find myself in front of a microphone. And I look around, and there's a band behind me, like a rock and roll band. And they've got all their regalia on and their jewelry and stuff. And the bass player, he's got the playlist on the back of his guitar, and he's showing it to the rhythm guitar player and showing it to the drummer, and they're getting ready. And suddenly this roadie comes up to me, and he takes a guitar strap and puts it around my neck, and suddenly I have a guitar. And I can feel the weight of this electric guitar. And I stand there and I think, oh my God, I'm on this stage, and I discover that I'm the lead singer and the lead guitarist, of which I can do neither, And I seem to know that, but there's people on the other side of that curtain, hundreds and thousands of people, and they're milling around and they're getting excited and everything. And I stand there, and the curtain begins to draw apart, and someone says, now welcome, let's give a Chicago welcome to Captain Stardust and the Moonwalkers. Okay, and the curtain comes up, and everyone begins to applaud. It's a standing ovation, and I think, oh my God, I'm Captain Stardust. I have no idea what I'm doing. So, but I give it the college try, and I kind of turn to the band. I go, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, and they start up. They're like Led Zeppelin or something, and they've just got this great thing going on, and I'm just kind of there, and I don't even know how to hold this thing. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of like I don't know how many of you have experienced this as a parent. You have this. You have this badge on you that says parent, and so suddenly everyone's sort of looking at you like you should know what you're doing. I remember when my kids were really little, and there would be the parent-teacher conference, and I would go see Mrs. Bradley or something, and I'd find out that my kid was playing, hangman on the back wall of the school. And so we would have this conference, and she would tell us what's going on. And so I would go home, and we sit down, and of course, one of my kids would know that I went to the parent-teacher conference. So you sit down, and you really want to show up like Captain Stardust. You know what I'm saying? You want to show up in that moment. So you sit down, and this is serious stuff. But you think, okay, I got to show up with love, I got to show up with compassion, I got to show up with seriousness, I got all these things I got to show up, and so, your kid's looking at you, and you go, I know that you know that I saw Mrs. Bradley today. And I just want to tell you that. And furthermore, let me be incredibly clear about this, that I know what's going on, and she knows I know, and she knows I know, and so I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page here. The kid's looking at you like, do you even know what you're doing? And it's like in our lives when we want to show up in a particular way. Last 4 weeks we've been talking about God, new thoughts, ideas about God. We don't believe that God is a person. We believe God is an energy. We believe God is a life force. But then when we boil it all down, we believe that God is love. And I made a whole case for that, and if you weren't here, I'm sorry. But anyway, I made a whole case for God is love. So, as spiritual seekers, as those of us who are interested in spiritual matters, and we come to places like this, and we read our books, and we hang out with each other, and we go to book studies, and we go to special seminars, and we go to Buddhist retreats, and we meditate, and we pray, and we do all these things, and we get into spiritual practice. And one of the reasons that we want to get into spiritual practice is because we want to show up in a particular way in the world. we could say, I want to show up in spirit, or we could say, I want to show up in love. And there is that person we love so much. There's that difficult person. There's that difficult email. There's that difficult situation. That challenging person, that challenging something that shows up. And if we don't show up the way we want to, we know it instantly. I can't tell you how many, because I have a partner who's also in this teaching, I can't tell you how many times, she'll know that I've got something challenging. Could be with one of my kids, my family. I'm on the phone with my sister. I'm here at the center, and I'll come home, and she'll say, well, how did that go? And she can look at me, and I just say, wow, that didn't go the way I wanted it to. I didn't show up the way I wanted to. It was challenging. I found myself getting involved in fear and lack and all that kind of stuff. And we know that when that situation is in front of us, we aren't connected. We aren't connected to this thing called love. Years ago, when my kids were really little, they got involved in soccer. And my kids are now in their 30s. I've got a son who's closing in on 40, so it was a long time ago. And soccer was, for those of us back then with kids, soccer was like, we didn't know what soccer was, and it was just, so we were getting our kids involved, and the soccer league, like I remember the day I signed my kids up for soccer. They wanted to play really bad, so I went and I signed up and paid the money, and they said, by the way, do you have any experience with soccer? And I said, oh my God, I played one time in gym class in high school, and I think it was a rainy day, and they made us play in the gym, and we ended up, knocking the ball off the walls and stuff. Oh, that's good. You want to coach? And so, these poor kids back then, when you coached kids in soccer back then, you were always comparing it to other sports you knew, like baseball and stuff. Like a little kid would come up and go, I'm supposed to be a striker. What am I supposed to do? It's like, okay. It's kind of like being a center fielder, only you don't have a hat, you don't have a glove, you don't have a bat, you have a different uniform, and you don't touch the ball, you kick the ball. But you stand over there somewhere. And okay, I think for those of us who started off, you remember when we played kickball in grammar school? We all figured it was kind of that, so they were just kicking it back and forth, Well, I was involved there was a big fundraiser, had to do with this soccer league, this big club. And so we went to this fundraiser, those of us who were involved, and I was sort of on the board a little bit, and I did some coaching, and I tried to tell some kids what to do and whatever. So I showed up, and there was music, and there was food, and there was all kinds of raffles going on, and I think Chico State donated a couple soccer jerseys to be raffled off and stuff. And there was this, the president of the club brought out this glass box. It was like a trophy box, like the kinds you find at Chico Paper or Michael's or whatever to put something in. And in it was a soccer ball. And this soccer ball was, back then soccer balls were black and white. And soccer balls are kind of like, they're kind of stitched together in padding, almost like with a quilted kind of surface. There's padding on the ball. I have no idea why, because I don't understand soccer, but it's that way. And the different colored squares, which aren't really square, they're in some other kind of shape. I don't know why. And some are black and some are white. Today they're very fancy. They have different patterns and colors, but it's still the same idea. It's like this padded ball. So in this box was a soccer ball, and it was no longer black and white. It was just gray. And it no longer had a shiny surface to it. It was just scarred and scuffed and beat up, and this grimy, rough surface to it. It looked like it had just been ground under a tank somewhere. And it was in this glass box, and it was to be raffled off. And a bunch of kids that were there said, oh my God, they were going to their parents, buy tickets for the ball. They recognized the ball. They knew what it was. I didn't know what it was. You see, this is the story of the ball. There was a guy who grew up in Europe somewhere, and he, for some reason, decided to go to Chico State. I have no idea how a guy in Europe finds Chico State, but he did. And he came here for 4 years as a student, and he rented a room from some family up here in Paradise. And he was a soccer fanatic, or as he called it rightfully so, football, which I think is a commie plot, but anyway. So anyway, he was a soccer fanatic. And when he came into this town and he saw that this league was started up for kids, he got all involved in it. And they had him coach an elite team. A team of, I think they were very young teenagers, like say 11 to 13 or something, 14. And they were actually a traveling squad, and they did really good in tournaments. And someone talked him into coaching that group. And those kids loved him. They absolutely loved him. And that's what this fervor was about around this ball, because kids wanted their parents to get raffle tickets because they would love to have his personal ball. Now here's the story of the ball. This guy went everywhere with this ball. He went to the bathroom with his ball. He went to dinner with it. He went to class with his ball. He got on the bus with the ball. He traveled with the ball. He drove around with the ball. And every time he was outside, anywhere he went, he would dribble the ball with his feet to wherever he was going, class, store, whatever. He was a soccer fanatic. And when he was coaching, he knew all these great drills and all these great practice techniques, and he took these kids from this little town up in the foothills, and he was actually having them compete and do really well in tournaments in Sacramento and the Bay Area, and they just loved him. But there was another piece of his coaching, and that was that he told everyone on his team, he said, I want you to have your own ball. And if you can't afford a ball, then you'll take one of our practice balls, but if you can, get your own ball. He said, I want you to take a felt pen, I want you to write your name on the ball, or even better yet, name the ball. And he said, I want you to always have it with you. Well, these kids, these American kids said, well, okay, so what do we do with it? What kind of drills do we do with it? And what kind of practice do we do? He said, no. He said, just have the ball. And everywhere you go, just have it. Well, kids know what to do with the ball. It's called have fun with it. Now, he would probably have to tell adults to have fun with it and what to do to have fun, because sometimes we forget to have fun. The kids know what to do. So all over town, suddenly there were broken lamps and, dented screen doors and balls bouncing down the halls of schools. And suddenly in our school system, there were these really weird rules passed, like, if you bring your ball into the classroom, it goes under your chair and things like that. We had kids all over this town who had their own ball. They'd be out in the backyard, and they would have an ice cream cone, and they'd be, pounding the ball against the fence. And we had kids who were, on a street corner waiting for a bus, sitting on their ball. And we had kids pack them under their arm, and they were dribbling them around, and they would come to breakfast with it. And these kids, what he was doing was, it was like that old idea, become one with the ball. Make friends with the ball. Build a relationship with the ball. No coaches, no parents, no drills, no practice, no anything, just the ball. We who are spiritual seekers, we tend to get caught up in spiritual practice. And what is spiritual practice? It's prayer, it's meditation, it's the books, it's the classes, it's the yoga mats, it's all of that. And we find ourselves coming under the teachings of particular teachers or ideas or philosophies. But what do we do just to take it out and play with it? In other words, if I were to ask the question, if you were to just walk around with God, now, metaphysically we know we are, but to consciously just walk around with this idea of God? Or let's put a finer point on it. What if you were to simply walk around with what it is to love? That's it. Just love in our own unique way. See, this coach didn't say, go do something. What drills do we do? What practice do we do? No, just be with it. Just show up with it. Just do what you want with it. And see, this is the genius of what he was trying to teach, and that is when you put a kid into a game, a soccer game, let's say, and suddenly in his position the ball comes to him, he's involved in it. Well, a lot of kids freak out. Oh my God, I've got the ball has come to me, everybody's looking at me. But the genius in what he was saying was, if we have a relationship with it, it doesn't freak us out. We simply show up the way we know how to show up. Just show up in our unique way. Ernest Holmes in his work talks about the idea that all this talk about our relationship with Spirit, our relationship with love, he says we can only know as much as we allow ourselves to know. We can only know as much as we are open to know. We can only know as much as that is familiar to us. To simply show up in our own way. To simply be so comfortable with love. To know the ins and outs of love. To know what we do with love. To know the best way to carry love, express love. To know how to avoid things like codependency or throwing ourselves under the bus or engaging in unhealthy situations around love. To simply understand that sometimes we're vulnerable in love. And that maybe love is about sitting down with a kid or with a difficult person saying, at this moment right now, I really don't know what to do. I love you, but I don't know what to do. What do we do when those difficult situations come up? How do we handle that? Years ago, many, many years ago, before sports was integrated on a professional level in this country, before Jackie Robinson, baseball, like everything else, was segregated. And so there were these professional baseball leagues that came up that we're familiar with, the minor leagues, the major leagues, the New York Yankees, all that kind of stuff. And then there was another set of leagues that grew up called the Negro Leagues. They were around for many years. And I kind of have a passion for the Negro Leagues. I've read a lot about them. I've seen a lot of documentaries. There's a book, I'm trying to remember, I think it's called The Sun Never Shines. It's about the Negro Leagues. It's just this wonderful book and what those guys went through, playing through segregation and what that league was like. In the Negro Leagues, there became a tradition called shadow ball. And it went something like this. Before a game would start, if you go to any baseball game, Little League game, Major League game, doesn't matter, you'll see what they call infield. And so the infielders get out there. Third base, shortstop, second base, first base, they're in their position. You have the catcher. He's standing by the plate. And a coach or manager comes out and he's got a bat in one hand, and he takes the ball and he hits grounders to everybody. And he says, okay, let's turn a double play. So whoever gets the ball throws to second, throws to first, throws home. Let's get one. Whoever gets the ball, throw to first. Let's get him at home. Whoever gets the ball throws it home. Let's get a triple play, third, second, first. Let's get a double play the hard way, third base, first base, home. All those kinds of things. So he's hitting the ball as hard as he can, grounders to these guys who are playing the infield, and it's coming to them, and they do all these things. And the point of the coach is to sometimes make it really difficult to put it out of their reach. So in the Negro Leagues, and this came out of the fact that in the Negro Leagues, money was always an issue. Resources were always an issue. They never traveled by trains or anything back in those days. It was always buses. It was always double headers. It was always, having to travel 300 miles from one game to the next day, a day game after a night game. And there was always a lot of resource problems. So they developed this thing where the coach would come out there and he'd have a baseball, he'd have a physical baseball, and he'd hit some of these grounders for a while. And then, and it was always thrown into the catcher, and the catcher would give it to him and he would hit it again. And then somebody in the infield would create a distraction. They would yell at the bat boy, or they'd say, yeah, I need you to move over here. And the fans who were there watching this before the game started would look, and they would take this ball and they would hide it somewhere. And then the manager or the coach would throw something in the air, which was nothing, and hit it, and it would go, and these guys would take infield that way. And they would watch how the person swung the bat, and they could tell if the grounder was going to be hard or left or right, and these guys would dive and they would roll and they'd get dust all over them, and they'd get up and they'd throw from their knees over to first base. It'd be a wild throw. The guy would jump in the air, would go over his head, say, hey, do I look like I'm 10 feet tall? What's up with you? And the bat boy would go get the ball and throw it to the catcher. And the thing was, they were so good at this that the fans very rarely knew they didn't have a ball. It was called shadow ball. And especially with white fans, and they loved it with white fans, because white fans didn't have a clue. And they would ooh and ah, and oh my God, you see what that guy did? And he threw it, and he was going around so fast. And these players got to where they could hit their gloves with their fists to make it sound like they were catching the ball in their gloves. It was an art form. So, the last drill of infield is where the manager or the coach says, okay, bring it in. So he hits a ball, hits a ground into the third baseman gets it, throws right to the catcher, runs off the field. You go that way from third to first, all the way around. And so again, this is shadow ball. And so especially if there were a lot of white fans, the catcher would be the last guy to leave the field, and he would trot off the field. He'd be running towards the dugout. There'd be some white fans there. He'd say, hey kid, you want a souvenir? You want the ball? Yeah, give me the souvenir, throw me the ball. He says, you already got it. And what are you going to do with it? Can you imagine the relationship those guys had with the tools of the game in order to pull that off? To pull off shadow ball. The intimacy that they had with the ball, with the gloves, with the way the game was. Can you imagine what they did in their time away from the field in order to pull that off? And you know what I think about today? Today is Sunday, and all across this town, all across America, all across the world maybe, there's people in churches. And why are we in churches? Why do people come to churches? You know, looking for God, looking for love. And so, some minister somewhere says, hey kid, I got some love here. You want some love? Yeah, give me a souvenir, give me some love. You already got it. What are you going to do with it? That's what it's about. It's about developing our personal relationship with whatever it is. To personalize it. So, let's state something obvious metaphysically. We say, God shows up as us. God shows up as us. Love shows up as us. So, you know, sometimes in metaphysics we say God is not a person. Yeah, it is. It is. It's you. It's me. Love is not personified. Sure it is. It's you. It's me. It's how we express, how we show up, how we make it our own. How do I work with love enough to where I make it my own? How do I walk around with it? What do I do with it? Because I've got it. You know, I can't put my hands on it, but yet at the same time I can. It's the music that we make. It's the way that we step into it. It's our shadow ball. It's our practice. Ernest Holmes in his work talks about our work is very law-oriented. The law of cause and effect, the law of circulation. But Ernest Holmes talks about it, and all the other metaphysical teachers talk about the fact that there is a very personal law. And the personal law is what we make of anything. So the question today is, how does the law of love show up personified through me? And what do I do with that? What do I do with that when that kid is sitting across the table from me, or that difficult person, or that person I love so much, or I'm talking to someone who is really going through it, or I'm really going through it, whatever it is, how do I show up for that? I remember, speaking of kids and teachers and stuff, one of the biggest challenges in my life was when I went through my divorce. I had 3 kids, they were very young. I was the one who chose to leave. And I remember I didn't see them for several weeks, and finally I had an opportunity to spend a weekend with them, to get them for a weekend. And I was staying, a friend of mine was selling a house, and so he had this vacant house, so he let me stay there with a nice chest and a lawn chair and stuff. I remember bringing my kids into that situation. Oh, we're going to spend the weekend with Dad, and we go into an empty house, you know. And I remember, there's a certain BS factor, you know what I'm saying? The BS factor of, how you doing? Let's go get a hamburger, and then there's that time where you sit down, and for us it was sitting on a floor in this house, and they're looking at me, and one of my kids, my middle son, said, okay, so what's going on? Little kid, what's going on? I thought, wow, you got guts, man. That was so cool. I didn't think it was cool at the time. Because, I did not know how to show up in that. And so, practice, what does that mean? Spiritual practice. It means, besides all the other stuff, which is good, there's nothing wrong with it, it means, what do we do with it on our own? How do we make it ours? How do we own it? How do we put our own signature